Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and you guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And I stumbled across a video by Jeremy Ethier, who did a video discussing knee pain on squats and solutions for that. And Jeremy runs one of those channels that I don't actually dislike his channel. It's not a bad channel at all, but this is a case of where you do see where Jeremy is a little bit green as far as actual training knowledge, particularly with big lifts by like squats. Because like we talk about knee pain, if you actually watch the way he personally performs squats, well, that could actually contribute to knee pain, and he doesn't really perform the squat ideally to prevent that to begin with, and his solutions are more complicated than they need to be. So let me go ahead and put on my +5 hat of speechcraft, lovingly called my +5 hat of autism by many of you, and let's talk about this. All right, a couple things we need to keep in mind. He talked about things like knee slide, strain on the knee joint, everything else, and saying that, look, knee pain's going to happen. No, knee pain is not a normal part of squatting. It's not a normal part of squatting, and some of the solutions he's talking about as far as corrective exercises, you shouldn't be getting to the point to where you need those. And what I'm going to say right up front, you don't need to squat the way Jeremy squats. This whole toes forward thing he does, like he does three things that I'm going to tell you right now are going to contribute slightly to knee inflammation. Now, fortunately, he doesn't do two of the other common ones, so that's a good thing. What are the two most common ones? Squatting high, right? Squatting too high, so you don't go to depth. Squatting above parallel, stopping before you get to parallel, that's a big one. And I mean true parallel, not what you guys think parallel is. And wearing knee wraps. Knee wraps on any leg exercise will eventually damage your knee joint. There's scientific evidence on this. Knee wraps are a bad idea unless you're going to compete in a knee wraps division in the sport of powerlifting. No one else on earth has any reason to put knee wraps on. And those guys accept that it's going to damage their knees over time. Hopefully they accept and understand that, who choose to compete in that. They're putting their competitiveness and their choice of classes, because not all classes use wraps. I don't use wraps. That they accept that they're going to go and sacrifice their knees for their sport, for their version of the sport. Not everyone has to. Most divisions don't even have knee wraps. So let's come back over to the point. That's your two causes usually. Jeremy, that whole toes forward thing, that tends to put more shear on the knee, right? The toes forward. You should, if you're worried about knee pain ever or knee inflammation or issues with your knee, you need to have your toes out. Now, he pointed that out as a solution to the problem after it starts, but it's like, why are you going to wait till you have knee pain to learn to start turning your toes out and to push your feet outward on the squat? That's actually what you should be doing. You should be digging into the floor and pushing out. And that's one of the issues I had there too, is that he pointed out, oh, you should be pressing your weight into the floor down. It's like, no, you need to turn your toes out a little bit and press outward. You press outward. And if you press outward, we don't have to deal with a lot of these mobility issues he discussed with the ankle and everything else. And that's kind of the problem we come to, is that he has a lot of corrections through here that could be resolved just by learning how to squat correctly. Right? If you just learn to squat correctly, these problems don't develop. So again, talking about, oh, you need to learn to press down. And it's like, well, if you don't have your toes forward, you don't need to learn how to press down. Your toes need to be slightly out. They need to be out. Out, and then you press outward. That's part of your solution. All right, that alone by itself will correct a lot of the problems. But the whole thing is that he has the toes forward, and then he's having to come up with all these solutions because he's using a method that makes it harder to get the right mental cues. It also makes it harder to keep the bar mid-foot, because that's the other thing he pointed out. You can't lean forward. You've got to stop yourself from leaning forward. You have to keep the bar mid-foot instead of letting the weight shift forward. And he talked about ankle mobility. Well, if you just turn your toes out more and push your feet apart, it's easier to keep the bar mid-foot. You have a more up and down bar path, right? It makes it easier. So that's part of your solution. The other thing, again, he runs into, he's got the bar way up high on his traps. And I'm not against high bar squatting. I high bar squat. But that's not high bar. That's something that was essentially done as a joke on American weightlifters by like Chinese lifters. they came over and played a prank on American Olympic lifters and tell them, oh yeah, we put our bar way up high on our traps. That then descended down somehow into the fitness world because it was a joke that got played to make American weightlifters suck more by the Chinese team many years ago. And that resulted in a trickle-down effect of a bunch of Americans think you're supposed to put the bar way up on top of your traps, up high to where there's a gap instead of a little further down the trap, right? And that's what he does. It's like, okay, that's not the correct way to squat. And again, that's going to make it a little bit harder to stop you from going forward. So think about it this way. If you got your toes totally forward and you've got the bar really high on the traps up at the top like he's doing, it is going to be harder to keep the bar mid-foot. Right? Put the bar on the correct spot on your traps. Doesn't mean I'm not telling you to do a low bar. Low bar is below the traps. All right, it's down on the scapula all the way down. All right, high bar is on the traps, but further down than that, turn your toes out and push outward with your feet. Okay, problem solved. And again, the other thing you talked about is the issue of knee vagus. All right, and then he has these little small corrective exercises. I'm not saying there aren't exercises we can do to strengthen these things, but learn to turn your knees out. Okay, let's come back over to the other thing you do. What does he do on every rep? He has that pelvic tilt at the top. He lets his pelvis roll under at the top of your reps. Why are you doing that? All right, that's silly shit that came out of the bodybuilding world. It doesn't help you do anything. It's not going to give you better glute recruitment. All right, there are different exercises. If you're worried about getting a peak contraction for your glutes at the top, you're not doing it against tension up there. All you're doing is loosening the load. You're going to actually have a higher chance of straining an erector. It's going to be easier to hurt your lower back squatting by doing that. And it's unloading what you need. Because what do we want? On every rep, before you do the eccentric rep, what do you want to do? Let's come back to that point. If you have your toes out and you're pushing your feet apart, when you take your breath before each rep, because you should be taking a breath before each rep, right? Before some of you guys say constant tension. Constant tension is a bodybuilder myth. It's not based on real physiology. It's nonsense. Forget that stupid shit. Okay? Forget that stupid shit. When you take your deep breath so that you can brace, you actively turn your knees out on each rep. Like you should see a visible outward right before you start the eccentric rep. And if you turn your knees out as you're taking that breath right before you drop each time, it helps your hips open up. And then when you drop into the hole, you want to consciously, when you get to the bottom, before you come back up and restart the concentric rep, you want to turn your knees out. All right, that's just learning how to squat. That's not necessarily a muscle weakness because you can just reduce the weight to a weight you can manage and then build back up. But if you learn to actively do that and you turn the knees out before you drop and then drive them out when you're at the bottom because you have your toes out and you're pushing outward, guess what happens? The problem resolves itself. A lot of the problem resolves itself. That stops most of your problems right there. Now, if you want to talk about corrective exercises to help protect your knees, do more hamstring work, right? Most people are too quad dominant. They don't have enough hamstring strength. They don't have enough posterior chain strength. Do more hamstring work. That will protect the knee joint also better. Now, the other thing that bothers me is that he talked about box squats, but then he showed a high box. That is absolutely not an acceptable box squat. Now, the data does show that you keep a more vertical shin on box squats. I use a lot of box squats. Box squats are great for protecting the knee. However, high box squats are not useful. They're not good. You need to be going below parallel. That box that he is squatting on is entirely too high. It's entirely too high. I personally squat to 2 inches below parallel on a box twice a week. That's what I recommend. That's what I advocate. That's what I think you should do. And I really wish that he had shown some of that. So guys, there's a lot of background noise out there. I'm going to go ahead and end this video short. I'll flip in some clips of me box squatting. So I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.